Expert there. Let's bring in the former spokesperson for Benjamin Netanyahu, David Mencer. Thanks for joining us, David. Can we deduce from this kind of ruling by the International Court, didn't call for a ceasefire, that for Israel now in Gaza as part of its military operation, its self-defense operation, it will continue business as usual?
Look, I think in a very, very difficult week here in Israel, when we've suffered the losses of our dear sons in fighting this evil of Hamas, in a very, very difficult week, I think at this moment, at the threshold of the Jewish Sabbath here in Israel, Israelis would be justified in allowing themselves a brief smile on their face, because the attempt by South Africa to get this pseudo-legal judgment against Israel has failed resoundingly. It has been an absolute and total failure. There is no other way to spin this, as the South Africans perhaps have. Most importantly, the South African foreign minister just there was saying that the court said that Hamas should release the hostages. The court didn't say should release. They said it must release. That is a legal judgment saying it must release these hostages. And that is the key issue here in Israel. More than 100 of our people, we are desperate to come back. Everybody knows their names here in Israel. Everybody feels the pain of the families of those hostages. And that is why it is so important that this judgment has been made today and roundly rejected South Africa's attempt to act as a pro bono lawyer on behalf of Hamas.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I wonder what your take is on this, which is what on earth is South Africa up to? I mean, I used to live in Africa, and I don't think Cyril Ramaphosa often showers himself in moral glory if you look back at his checkered political past and some of the accusation against him and some of the things taking place in South Africa today. And I think it's worth noting as well that it's been a year since South Africa joined naval exercises with Russia and with Iran. What on earth are they trying to do? And why?
Well, all of us here in Israel are just really bewildered at South Africa's decision. Unfortunately, much as so many in Israel and so many Jewish people were side by side with Nelson Mandela in his long march to freedom, South Africa now has sadly, very, very sadly, allies itself with Russia. It's refused to condemn the invasion of Ukraine. It allies itself with China, which, of course, persecutes the Uyghur Muslims inside China. And also it allies itself with Iran. It invited Hamas leaders to talk to them on the days after the terrible 7th of October attack. So we're all absolutely disappointed with South Africa. And the only thing I can think of as a sort of political watcher is that, it's a classic case of projection. South Africa, of course, suffers from 27,000 murders every year, not a war, not a war, a conflict, 27,000 murders in civilian society. And the only way it can try and deflect some of the mess which is made of that country, that beautiful and that blessed country, is to try and attack Israel, as so many Arab leaders have done in the past, and they have failed. And this attempt now has failed as well.
Is it the case that, I would argue that Israel is acting in self-defense, and it is in fact the victim of genocide on October the 7th. And as such, its self-defense campaign continues. So as I was asking you earlier, David, do we assume from today's events and the International Court ruling that Mr. Netanyahu and Israel will continue their stated campaign to rid the world and indeed the Gaza Strip of Hamas?
Look, well, I'll tell you this. I've just come out the Prime Minister's office here in Israel, and legal advice is absolutely key to everything which the IDF does. Now, we as the Jewish people, we recognize evil when it happens. We've experienced this evil before, and we experienced it on the 7th of April, this ghastly invasion of our land, this attempt to wipe us out. That's what so much of the international media doesn't seem to get about the feelings of Israelis right now. This wasn't just an isolated event over a day or two. This was an attempt to wipe out our people. It was an attempt at genocide against the Jewish people. We recognize it because we know that this is the worst loss of Jewish life on any single day since the Holocaust. Now, Israel will continue to achieve our dual aims. Number one is rescuing the hostages, and number two, ensuring that Hamas can never, ever, ever be a threat to my people again, because you can be damned sure that this evil which was meted against us here in Israel, on the border down south, these terrible rockets, these indiscriminate attacks, these rapes, these beheadings, these murders of children, they won't stop here in Israel. They will come to the streets of London as well, unfortunately. We are on the front line of fighting this vulgarity and this barbarity, and we must win for the sake of humanity. We must be successful. And believe you me, we will be.
Yeah, I mean, based on that, I think it's fair to say that some people in the West may regard some of the cultural changes that have happened on our own soil over the past few decades as something we may live to regret. We have seen big pro-Palestine demonstrations. They've been banned in France, of course, still taking place almost weekly here in London, and, of course, some pretty big ones happening in America. And it strikes me that that is probably what's driving Joe Biden to now call for a ceasefire before the American elections, because he must find that to some degree politically expedient for himself. But that must be a great disappointment to you.
Well, to be fair, I don't think Joe Biden has called for a ceasefire. He hasn't gone that far. In fact, Joe Biden has been a phenomenal friend to this country, not least in supplying us with the munitions to finish the job. I mean, not least, as well as illegal support and supporting Israel at the United Nations and on the international stage. So there is very little daylight between the Israeli position and the US. But he also understands, as he did in the days after the 7th of October, this is a battle that Israel must win. Rishi Sunak said, we want you to win. And Joe Biden has said the very, very same thing. Of course, the images are bad, but that's exactly what Hamas, this is a key tool in Hamas's armory. They want these images of terrible damage to civilians, and Israel is trying its damnedest, and we must try even harder to try and limit damage to civilians, even as Hamas pushes them to the front to suffer. I wouldn't be surprised if Hamas is actually physically killing its own people, as an ITN report parroted by the BBC the other day. Hamas will do anything. An institutional rapist regime will do anything, including murdering its own people, so that it gets positive reinforcement in international media. Thankfully, people like TalkTV don't fall for this nonsense. The BBC does, unfortunately.
We certainly don't fall for it. Just a quick word, David, before you go. A few words for the Jewish community here in Britain. A surprisingly small number of people. The way you read the papers, you think there were millions of Jews in this country. It's about 300,000. Many of them live where I live, as a matter of fact, in North London. Every weekend in our big city, especially London, we get these huge snaking pro-Palestine marches, from the river to the sea. They're chanting jihad. Our police don't seem to do much about it. And my neighbours are telling me that for the first time in their lives, that as Jewish British citizens, they feel fearful in their own country. I mean, this is a disgraceful situation. Your thoughts?
I think we must all take a broader view of this crisis. Who is on whose side, if I can put it like that? On Israel's side is, I think, the UK, the government of the UK. The US, I think, essentially forces for good in the world, Germany as well, much of the European Union. Who is on Hamas's side? It's Russia, it's China. China, of course, which controls TikTok, where so many of our young people are having their brains, unfortunately, washed by the Chinese Communist Party. These are the countries, Iran, which is seeking desperately to disrupt European capitals and is succeeding. Just, open your eyes, Western world. Have a look at who is backing who in this battle. But for the Jewish community in the UK, I would say first things first. They must take care of their personal security. And I'm so happy, all of us here in Israel are so happy that the police in the UK are taking threats against the Jewish community so seriously. We've grown up with these threats. We know these threats are real. They are physical in their nature. And we're so happy that the police are trying their hardest. But of course, stand proud as British Jews. Live your life as British Jews, and we must not let this evil, barbaric regime push the Jewish community underground, as it's happened in so many different countries around Europe. You know, Jewish people must be loud and proud, while at the same time, they are, of course, British people, first and foremost. British Jewish people must be loud and proud in their identity and be allowed to identify with who they actually are.
Hear, hear. Great to talk to you. That's David Mencer, former spokesperson for Benjamin Netanyahu. Pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, really powerful. And you know, I absolutely agree with him. The security of Israel is the security of the world. And we do need